Hello, and welcome to the 51st in an unknown number of podcasts. The poet John Donne famously wrote that no man is an island. And yet in these days of lockdown, shielding, isolating and social distancing, it can seem that it goes against his concept of humans as social beings. I have to say that while I've been producing these podcasts, there's been a feeling that I've been working in splendid isolation. So I'm very thankful through technology to once again welcome a guest to the podcast. This is the third episode of KMAT's version of Desert Island Discs, and it gives me great pleasure to reveal that today's castaway is Mrs. Stoddart. So welcome to Desert Island Discs, Mrs. Stoddart.
Greetings, Mr. Fung, and thank you for having me on Desert Island Discs. I'm actually a big fan of the original programme, and if I may, I'd like to share two of my favourite guests from over the years. I think it was around 2015. I remember listening to Lem Sissay. Interestingly, I think we might have the same luxury item that will be revealed shortly. And also Davina McCall, that one's well worth a listen if you haven't listened to Desert Island Discs at all. Right, let's do this.
Let's do this indeed. Your first question, Mrs. Stoddart, is what recordings would you choose to listen to?
So this is a tricky first question for me. I adore music and I have quite an eclectic taste, but my first choice would be George Benson's greatest hits. I was lucky enough to see George perform a few years ago, and my best friend kindly bought us tickets, and his music was something I grew up listening to. My husband always plays me one of his tracks, Love Ballad, on a Sunday morning when he's making the tea. So I'm a big romantic and I'd like to be reminded of these simple things and little moments when I'm stranded. Secondly, Swedish House Mafia. I was also lucky enough to see these guys perform at Creamfields last summer, and I live for dance music. And the classic Dance Like No One's Watching, which can be embarrassing, and Raving on My Own would definitely keep me laughing, which I think is extremely important. And finally, music by Chopin. So not many of you will know that I am a pianist. My Polish grandfather bought me my first piano age 7, and he would make me play for him whilst he was sat in the living room. And if I made a mistake, he would bang loudly on the wall through to the dining room and shout, "Play that again." And there's something that empowers me when I listen to music by Chopin. So they are definitely the 3 recordings that I would choose to listen to.
That is quite an eclectic mix. And having seen you dance, I can verify that you do indeed dance like nobody else is watching. And indeed, in the same way that I would like to sing a duet with Mrs. McGeehan, who revealed her passion for Les Mis last week, when all of this is over, it would be nice, given that I play the piano as well, for us to perhaps collaborate with some keyboard pieces when this is over. Moving on to the next question, Mrs. Stoddart. Which book would you read?
So there's 3 books that I would read whilst I was stranded on the desert island. 3 from my top 10, I think, of all time. The first one is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and it's a fable about following your dreams. I first read this book just before I turned 30. It's about a boy named Santiago who is on a journey to find his personal legend, if you like, and it's a beautiful story about the pilgrimage that life should be. It has an inspiring message for every reader, I think, and there's a memorable line where the boy is speaking to the alchemist and he says, "My heart is afraid that it will have to suffer." And the alchemist replies, "Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams." It's in my top 10 reads because it taught me a lot at a point in life where there were a few obstacles for me, that fear is a bigger obstacle than the obstacle itself, and to embrace the present. So I try not to live in the past or the future, and I try to focus on my own journey. And I think that is a good rule to live by when stranded on a desert island. So the second book that I'd like to read again is The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. I read this fairly recently and it had a massively huge impact and help my mental health and well-being just through a small formula to help wake up early and to feel inspired and be driven to get the most out of each day. And it's all about protecting the quietest hours of the day, so you have time for personal growth, and whether that is in exercise or productivity at work. And it starts with, if you haven't guessed, with getting up at 5 a.m. It's a really enthusiastic and encouraging read, and I think it would help me in being more creative and any troubles that I might encounter in my stranded scenario. And then finally, a book that is really close to my heart, I would read Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I read this nearly every week growing up, and that means there would be something comforting in this nostalgia of this read for me.
Some good choices there, and also some good advice for the listeners as well. So thank you for that, Mrs. Stoddart. I can actually reveal that another member of staff once upon a time declared that Charlotte's Web was their most favourite book. When asked why, and spoiler alert here, they simply said, because the pig wins. Now, moving on. On your desert island, Mrs. Stoddart, you have a large square dining table. So who would you invite to dinner on your island?
Oh, I love this question. There are loads of people that I would invite, but if I had to narrow it down to my top 3, then I would definitely start with this chap here, Grayson Perry. And I really do hope that you've all been watching Grayson Perry's art club during lockdown. I first discovered Grayson when I studied him for my art A level, and since then I've seen him on tour, I've read all of his books, and I've followed all his work in exhibitions and galleries all over. He is a big advocate of the mental health benefits of creativity, and he just speaks so eloquently about life and human experience, and I could listen to him for hours. So he is without doubt not only my favourite artist of all time, but he is definitely at the top of my guest list. Secondly, I would invite the lovely Ewan McGregor, not for his acting, although I'm sure it would come up in conversation, but for his love of and experience on motorcycles. I've watched The Long Way Down and The Long Way Round more times than I can remember, and it was him and Charlie Boorman who inspired me and my husband to do our motorbike licenses. So I'm just waiting for The Long Way Up to be released, and I believe that's going to be out shortly, so I'm really excited about that. I share in Ewan's emotion for the machine, and that is in that I've never gotten over motorbikes since I started riding them. And my husband and I are meant to be riding our BMWs to Africa through Spain this summer, but unfortunately it's not looking too likely that it will go ahead as planned. That, and I also have a bit of a crush on Ewan McGregor, so I'm just saying it quietly in case my Ewan can hear me. And then finally, Michelle Obama. I don't need to say a lot about this lady. She is the bomb diggity of women, and if you haven't read her book or watched the documentary on Netflix, please do it now. I'd love to hear more about her extraordinary life, and she is just so witty and warm and an incredible role model for young people. So she would be on my guest list as well, and I think we'd all have a bit of a giggle.
I believe that you would all have a giggle too, to say nothing of the conversations that would ensue. In fact, I believe those conversations would, in your words, Mrs. Stoddart, be bomb diggity. Now, on to the next question. What luxury item could you not live without?
So my luxury item that I couldn't live without is an easy and perhaps an obvious one for me. It's actually pencil and paper, and I know everyone says it, but I am absolutely convinced that I have a book in me. So being stranded on a desert island would be as good a time as any to reflect, write, and hope that one day I might become that published author that I've always dreamed of being. I'd also sketch and journal, and that would keep me positive and happy. And this is assuming that I can't keep Ewan McGregor after dinner as a luxury item, right?
Well, I think we'll let the listeners decide. If you believe that Ewan McGregor is a luxury item, then do please let me know in the usual way via Twitter @ChiefVicar. Actually, Mrs. Stoddart, the thought occurs that perhaps the title of the book that you're going to write while you're on your desert island could perhaps be The Two Ewans. Anyway, moving on to your final question. What would be your message in a bottle?
So my message in a bottle would be to whoever the lucky recipient was who was perhaps walking along the beach one morning and stumbled across my message in a bottle washed up on the shore. When I first started dating my husband, aged 18, he had a third generation iPod and it had an engraving on the back that read, "Life is not a rehearsal." And I knew many things at that point, but firstly, as Ewan McGregor was not looking likely, this Ewan was someone that I wanted to spend my life with. And secondly, it seemed like a great rule to live by. So I'd probably write this to remind the reader that in case they get stranded on a desert island, that life is not a rehearsal and treat each day as if it were your last.
Thank you for your wise words, Mrs. Stoddart, and thank you also for being my guest today on Desert Island Discs. Now, dear listener, if you have any comments about today's episode or about any of the podcasts, or indeed if you have an opinion on whether or not Ewan McGregor is a luxury item, then do please let me know in the usual way via Twitter @ChiefVicar. I do hope you've enjoyed today's episode, so until tomorrow's podcast, as ever, be kind, take care, and stay safe.